close your eyes and imagine something. Imagine a world without fire. No cooked food, only raw meat, tough roots, and fibrous plants that take hours to chew and barely give you enough calories to survive. No warmth in winter, just the brutal cold, your body shivering through the night, burning precious energy just to stay alive. No light after sunset, only darkness, complete and terrifying, filled with the sounds of predators whose eyes can see in the dark far better than yours ever could. No way to defend yourself when those predators come. No way to process materials, to harden wood, to create advanced tools. No central gathering place for your group. No long evenings of storytelling, teaching, bonding. Just survival. Raw, cold, dangerous survival. This was the world of our ancestors for millions of years, a world where humans were not predators, but prey animals, vulnerable and struggling, just another species trying not to go extinct. And then, at some point in our deep past, everything changed. Someone did something that seemed impossible. They took the thing that everyone feared, the thing that came from lightning strikes and burned through forests, the thing that killed and destroyed and consumed everything it touched. And they controlled it. They captured fire. They kept it alive. They fed it. They protected it. They carried it with them. And eventually they learned to create it on demand, whenever they needed it. In that moment, everything shifted. The balance of nature tilted. We stopped being just another primate competing for scraps. We became something entirely different. We became human. This is the story of the most important discovery in human history, the technology that literally changed our bodies, our brains, our behavior, and our destiny as a species. This is the story of how we tamed fire, and today we will be breaking it down. For most of Earth's history, fire was a force of nature. Lightning would strike a tree during a storm and flames would spread through the forest. Volcanoes would erupt, sending rivers of lava across the landscape. Spontaneous combustion in peat bogs or coal seams would create underground fires that burned for years. Animals, including our distant ancestors, had a simple relationship with fire. They ran from it. And that made sense. Fire kills. It burns flesh, destroys habitat, consumes everything in its path. Every instinct screams at you to flee when you see flames or smell smoke. But fire also creates opportunities. After the fire passes through a forest, the ground is littered with the cooked remains of animals that couldn't escape. Easy meat, already processed by heat, soft and digestible. And the predators that normally compete with you for food, many of them are gone, killed or driven away by the flames. Some of our early ancestors must have noticed this pattern. After the fire, there's food. After the fire, it's safer for a while. After the fire, certain plants grow back more vigorously. This is where it started, probably. Not with controlling fire, but with understanding it, recognizing that fire, despite being terrifying, also brings benefits. Archaeological evidence suggests that our relationship with fire goes back at least 1 million years, possibly longer. The earliest definitive evidence comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, where researchers have found burnt bones and plant ash in layers dating to approximately 1 million years ago. This is remarkable for several reasons. First, it's old, really old. Second, it's inside a cave, which means the fire wasn't natural. Lightning doesn't strike inside caves. This fire was brought there by someone, maintained by someone, used by someone. That someone was probably Homo erectus, one of our direct ancestors. Homo erectus was the first hominin to look somewhat like modern humans, with a taller, more slender build than earlier species. They had larger brains than their predecessors, about 900 cubic centimeters compared to 600 or less in earlier hominins. They made sophisticated stone tools. They migrated out of Africa into Asia and possibly Europe. And they used fire. But here's the crucial distinction we need to understand. Using fire and creating fire are two completely different things. Using fire means finding it in nature and keeping it alive. A lightning strike ignites a tree. You carefully approach after it stops being an inferno. You take a burning branch, you bring it back to your cave or campsite, you feed it with wood, keeping the flames going. You never let it go out, because if it does, you're back to square one, waiting for the next lightning strike or forest fire. This is incredibly difficult. Fire is demanding. It needs constant attention. It needs fuel. Too much wind, and it spreads out of control. Too much rain, and it dies. You need someone to watch it, to maintain it, to protect it. You need to understand what burns well and what doesn't. Dry wood, yes. Green wood, no. Grass burns fast, but doesn't last. Thick logs burn slow and steady. This requires knowledge, planning, and social cooperation. Someone has to be responsible for the fire. The whole group needs to understand its importance and work together to maintain it. And then there's the challenge of moving. Early humans were mobile, following herds of animals, tracking seasonal resources. If you need to move your camp, how do you transport fire? You can't just carry a burning log for miles. It will burn down to nothing or go out. The solution, which we know from studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, is to create fire bundles. You take coals from your fire, the pieces that are burning but not flaming, and you wrap them in leaves or bark with some dried grass or fungus. This creates a smoldering bundle that can stay lit for hours or even a full day if done correctly. When you reach your new camp, you unwrap the bundle, add kindling, blow on the coals, and restart your fire. But you have to be careful. Lose that bundle, drop it in water, let it burn too fast, and your fire is gone. And with it goes your protection, your warmth, your ability to cook food, and your light in the darkness. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the human relationship with fire. Capture it from nature, maintain it obsessively, never let it die. Live in constant fear of losing it. This was revolutionary compared to not having fire at all, but it was also limiting. You were dependent on nature providing fire in the first place, and you were constrained by the need to constantly maintain it. The next leap, the truly transformative moment, came when humans learned to create fire on demand. To start a fire from nothing, using only materials and techniques. To have the power to make fire whenever and wherever they needed it. This changed everything. So when did this happen? When did humans learn to create fire rather than just use it? The honest answer is, we're not entirely sure. Fire-making doesn't leave clear archaeological evidence the way fire use does. A hearth with burnt bones and ash proves someone had fire. But how they got that fire, whether they found it or made it, is harder to determine. What we can say is that by about 400,000 years ago, fire use becomes much more common in the archaeological record. Sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia show evidence of regular, controlled fire use in caves and open-air camps. The frequency and distribution suggest that by this point, humans could create fire reliably. Some researchers argue it might have been earlier. Others think it was later, perhaps as recent as 100,000 years ago. The debate continues. But whenever it happened, The techniques themselves are clear because they're still used today by people around the world who maintain traditional fire-making skills. There are two main methods for creating fire from scratch: friction and percussion. Friction firemaking is exactly what it sounds like. You create heat through friction, rubbing two pieces of wood together until the wood dust created by the rubbing gets hot enough to ignite. The most basic version is the hand drill. You take a straight stick and rotate it rapidly between your palms while pressing down on a flat piece of wood. The friction creates heat and wood dust. If you're skilled and persistent, that wood dust will begin to smolder, creating an ember. You then transfer that ember to a bundle of dry grass or other tinder, blow on it gently to provide oxygen, and the tinder ignites into flame. It sounds simple. It's not. It requires the right materials, perfectly dry wood, proper technique, and a lot of practice. Most modern people trying this for the first time will fail repeatedly before succeeding even once. A more advanced friction method is the bow drill. Instead of rotating the stick with your hands, you use a bow, essentially a curved stick with a cord, to rotate the drill much faster and with less effort. This is more efficient and more reliable, but it requires making the bow itself, which means you need cordage or sinew or some kind of string. The fire plow is another friction method, where you rub a stick back and forth along a groove in a piece of wood, creating friction and heat along the length of the groove rather than at a single point. All of these methods work. Indigenous peoples across the world have used them for thousands of years, but they all require significant skill, the right materials, and most importantly, dry conditions. Try to make friction fire in the rain or with damp wood, and you'll fail. The second major method is percussion firemaking, which involves striking two stones together to create sparks. Not just any stones. You need a hard stone like flint or chert, and you need a mineral that produces sparks when struck, like pyrite or marcasite. When you strike them together at the correct angle with the correct force, you create a shower of hot sparks. If those sparks land in highly flammable tinder like char cloth, dried fungus, or fine plant fibers, they can create an ember that you can then blow into flame. Percussion fire is faster than friction fire once you have the right materials and know the technique. But finding those materials isn't always easy, and if you don't have natural sources of pyrite, you're out of luck. For early humans, both methods would have been known and used depending on what was available. Friction fire requires less specialized materials, just wood, but more effort and skill. Percussion fire is faster but requires specific stones. The ability to create fire transformed human life in ways that are difficult to overstate. Let's break down exactly what changed. First and most importantly, fire gave us cooked food, and cooked food changed our biology. There's a hypothesis in paleoanthropology proposed by primatologist Richard Wrangham called the cooking hypothesis. It argues that the control of fire and the adoption of cooking was a key factor in human evolution, particularly in the development of our large brains. Here's the logic. Raw food requires a lot of energy to digest. Your gut has to work hard to break down tough plant fibers and raw meat. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, spend about 6 hours a day chewing their food. They have massive jaws, huge teeth, and long digestive tracts to process their raw diet. But when you cook food, you're essentially pre-digesting it. Heat breaks down tough fibers, denatures proteins, and makes nutrients more bioavailable. Cooked food is softer, easier to chew, easier to digest, and yields more calories for less effort. This has profound implications. If you're getting more calories from the same amount of food and spending less energy digesting it, you have a surplus of energy. And that surplus of energy can be used elsewhere in the body, like the brain. Brains are incredibly energy expensive. Your brain is about 2% of your body weight, but uses about 20% of your caloric intake. A bigger brain requires a lot of fuel, and cooking provided that fuel. Look at the fossil record. When fire use becomes common, we see changes in human anatomy. Teeth become smaller, jaws become less robust, the digestive tract shortens. These are all adaptations to eating softer, cooked food rather than tough, raw food. At the same time, brain size increases dramatically. Homo erectus, the species associated with early fire use, had a brain about 900 cubic centimeters. By the time we get to Homo heidelbergensis, around 600,000 years ago, brains are over 1,200 cubic centimeters. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens both have brains around 1,400 to 1,500 cubic centimeters. The correlation is striking. More fire use equals bigger brains. But cooking did more than just provide calories for bigger brains. It also made a wider variety of foods edible. Many plants contain toxins or anti-nutrients that make them dangerous or difficult to digest when raw, but cooking neutralizes many of these compounds. Suddenly, tubers, roots, and other starchy plants that were inedible or barely edible raw become nutritious staples. Cooking also kills parasites and bacteria in meat. Raw meat is dangerous. It can carry parasites like tapeworms, bacteria like salmonella, and other pathogens. Cooked meat is much safer. This means fewer people dying from foodborne illness, which means a healthier, more robust population. The second major benefit of fire is warmth. This seems obvious, but its implications are profound. Humans are tropical primates. We evolved in Africa in warm climates. We have relatively little body hair compared to other primates, and we're poorly adapted to cold environments. Without fire, expanding into colder regions would be nearly impossible. But with fire, you can survive anywhere. You can camp in Ice Age Europe with temperatures well below freezing, as long as you have fire to keep warm at night. This dramatically expanded the range of habitats available to humans. We could move into temperate and even subarctic regions, following herds of large mammals like mammoths and reindeer. This opened up vast new territories and resources. The third major benefit is protection. Fire keeps predators away. Our ancestors were not apex predators for most of our evolutionary history. We were prey animals. Lions, leopards, hyenas, saber-toothed cats, these were all threats, and they all hunted at night when humans, with our relatively poor night vision, were most vulnerable. But fire fears fire. Almost all animals have an instinctive fear of flames. A campfire creates a safe zone, a circle of protection where predators won't enter. This meant humans could sleep safely at night without needing to climb into trees or hide in deep caves. It meant we could camp in open areas, near water sources and good hunting grounds, rather than being restricted to defensible locations. The fourth benefit is light. Fire extends the day beyond sunset. Before fire, human activity was limited to daylight hours. Once the sun set, it was too dark and too dangerous to do much of anything. You huddled together in darkness and waited for dawn. But with fire, you have light. You can continue working on tools, processing food, repairing clothing. You can stay awake and active for several more hours after sunset. And crucially, you can socialize. This is where fire becomes not just a technology, but a catalyst for culture and consciousness. Think about a campfire. It's a natural gathering point. Everyone sits around it in a circle. Everyone's face is lit by the same warm glow. The darkness beyond creates intimacy, a sense of boundaries between the group and the outside world. This is where stories are told. This is where knowledge is passed down from elders to children. This is where the group bonds, where social relationships are strengthened, where culture is transmitted. Language, complex language with grammar and abstract concepts, probably evolved in parallel with fire use, because suddenly humans had time to talk. Hours every evening, sitting around the fire with nothing to do but communicate. And what do humans talk about when they have time? We tell stories. We share information about where food was found, where dangers were seen. We gossip about relationships within the group. We teach children how to make tools, where to find resources, what plants are edible. We create myths and legends to explain the world around us. Fire made all of this possible. It created the space, both physical and temporal, for culture to flourish. There's even a hypothesis, more speculative but intriguing, that fire influenced the development of human consciousness itself. When you sit and stare into a fire, something happens. The dancing flames are mesmerizing. Your mind drifts. You enter a kind of meditative state. You start to think about things beyond the immediate present, the past, the future, abstract concepts, plans. Some researchers have suggested that this fire-gazing, practiced for thousands of generations, may have influenced how human brains process information and generate consciousness, that the fire became a tool not just for survival, but for introspection and abstract thought. This is difficult to prove, of course, but it's undeniable that fire creates a unique psychological environment. The combination of warmth, safety, light, and the hypnotic movement of flames creates conditions unlike anything else in nature. Fire also enabled new technologies. You can use fire to harden wooden spears, making them more durable and effective. The Hominins spears we talked about in earlier videos, those incredibly well-made wooden spears from 300,000 years ago, were likely fire-hardened. You can use fire to process plant fibers, making them easier to work with for creating cordage, baskets, or clothing. You can use fire to make pitch and resin adhesives by heating tree sap, allowing you to attach stone points to wooden shafts more securely. You can use fire to create better stone tools through heat treatment, heating certain types of stone, like flint, and then cooling it slowly changes its structure, making it easier to flake and capable of holding a sharper edge. Later in human history, fire would enable pottery, metallurgy, and countless other technologies. But even in the Paleolithic, fire was opening doors to innovation that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. There's also an ecological dimension to human fire use that's often overlooked. Humans didn't just use fire for cooking and warmth, they used it to shape the landscape. Controlled burning, setting fires deliberately in grasslands or forests, has been practiced by humans for tens of thousands of years. Why? Because burning clears undergrowth, promotes the growth of certain plants that are useful to humans, and creates better habitat for game animals. In many parts of the world, the ecosystems that European colonizers encountered and thought were pristine wilderness were actually landscapes that had been managed by indigenous peoples using fire for thousands of years. Humans, with fire, became not just inhabitants of ecosystems, but shapers of them, a role no other species played at that scale. So fire changed our biology through cooking. It changed our geography by allowing us to survive in cold climates. It changed our behavior by creating safe, social spaces around the hearth. It changed our technology by enabling new methods of tool-making and material processing. And it changed our relationship with the natural world by giving us the power to modify entire landscapes. But there's one more thing fire did, something perhaps even more profound. It changed how we think about ourselves. Before fire, humans were subject to nature. We lived according to its rhythms, its rules, its limitations. We ate what we could find. We went where the climate allowed. We hid from predators. We were participants in the natural world, not controllers of it. Fire was the first time humans took a force of nature and bent it to our will. We didn't just adapt to fire, we mastered it. We decided when it burned and when it didn't. We used it for our purposes. This required planning, abstract thinking, delayed gratification. You can't maintain a fire if you only think about the immediate present. You need to gather firewood before you need it. You need to protect your fire from rain and wind. You need to teach the next generation how to keep it alive. Fire, in this sense, is the beginning of human exceptionalism, the beginning of the idea that we are separate from nature, that we can control it, shape it, use it for our benefit. This idea has taken us very far. It's led to agriculture, cities, industry, technology, space travel. Every human achievement ultimately traces back to that first moment when someone decided to keep a fire alive instead of running from it. But this idea also has costs. The belief that we can control nature, that we are separate from it rather than part of it, has led to environmental destruction, climate change, and the extinction of countless species. Fire gave us power, and like all power, it comes with responsibility, a responsibility we're still learning to handle. Today, in the modern world, fire is so ubiquitous that we barely think about it. You flip a switch, and gas flows through a pipe to your stove, igniting with a spark. You turn a dial, and electric heating elements glow red. You press a button on a remote, and your gas fireplace comes to life. We've abstracted fire to the point where we no longer even see flames for most of our heating and energy needs. Electricity from power plants, gas furnaces, internal combustion engines, all of these are fire in different forms, but we've hidden the flames away. And yet, something primal still draws us to fire. When we camp, we build a campfire and sit around it, even if we have flashlights and don't need it for light. When we can afford it, we install fireplaces in our homes, even if we have central heating. During the holidays, we light candles, even though we have electric lights. Why? Because fire still speaks to something deep in our evolutionary memory. It still represents safety, warmth, community, home. The control of fire is estimated to have added about 10 to 15 years to the human lifespan when it was first adopted. Cooked food, protection from predators, warmth and cold weather, all of these contributed to humans living longer, healthier lives. But more than that, fire created time. Time to think, to talk, to create, to pass on knowledge. Time to be human in the fullest sense. There's a reason that virtually every human culture has myths about fire. Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and giving it to humanity in Greek mythology. The firebird in Slavic folklore. The trickster coyote stealing fire in many Native American traditions. The Chinese myth of Suren, who discovered fire by rubbing sticks together. Fire is sacred because fire made us human. It's not metaphor, it's biological and archaeological fact. Without fire, we would still be relatively large primates, probably stuck in Africa, with smaller brains, limited technology, vulnerable to predators, and living short, harsh lives. With fire, we became something unprecedented. We became the species that could survive anywhere, create anything, imagine everything. Every time you light a match, turn on your stove, start your car, or simply enjoy the warmth of your heated home, you're using a power that humans fought for, experimented with, and mastered over hundreds of thousands of years. That flame you barely notice is the same force that your ancestors 1,000,000 years ago would have guarded with their lives, literally. It's the same heat that cooked the food, that fed the brain, that allows you to read these words, to understand this story, to think about your place in the vast sweep of human history. Fire didn't just change history. Fire made history possible. Because without fire, Without that first human who decided to keep the flames alive instead of running away, we wouldn't be here. There would be no civilization, no technology, no art, no science, no language complex enough to tell this story. We exist because someone, somewhere, at some point in the deep past, controlled fire. And in controlling fire, we began the long journey from being just another animal to being human. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration of the most important discovery in human history, hit that like button. Leave a comment below telling me about your relationship with fire. Do you camp? Do you build fires? Have you ever tried to make fire from scratch? I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into human evolution, the technologies that shaped us, and the moments that made us who we are today. I'll see you in the next one.